Why should you forgive yourself? And how? We all get down on ourselves from time to time for making errors, but never forgiving oneself can be detrimental to your mental health. Learn more about the art of self-forgiveness, including why it's so tough and what experts suggest. Why does it hurt so much to make mistakes? Everyone makes errors, whether it's blowing past your monthly budget or betraying a friend's trust. And what happens afterwards is also universal. We usually experience unpleasant emotions like shame and guilt after we realize we've damaged ourselves or someone else. According to researchers, these emotions were built into the human state through evolution. That's because even little errors, like as a missed hunt, inadequate weather or predator protection, or a life-threatening injury, might spell disaster for our forefathers. Shame and guilt served as adaptive responses in these situations. The emotions assisted us in learning from our mistakes and increasing our chances of surviving as a group. However, according to research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, guilt and shame didn't just aid in the construction of better shelters and the detection of dangers. Our individual sense of self-worth was shaped by these feelings. The study shows how our forefathers relied heavily on one another for survival, and how a misstep may make the offender unworthy of assistance, support, and access to resources. It's a notion that explains why, despite the fact that the stakes are often smaller many millennia later, we nevertheless punish ourselves for even the tiniest mistake, and why bigger missteps can be particularly tough to overcome. What does it mean to forgive oneself? Another area of study is how humans deal with feelings of regret and shame after making a mistake. Dr. Daryl Van Tongeren, an associate professor of psychology at Hope College in Holland, Michigan, has co-authored several research on this topic. He continues, "We were curious about a paradox in self-forgiveness. On the one hand, some people believe that forgiving yourself for a mistake gives you permission to do it again. On the other hand, individuals believe that self-forgiveness is essential for mental wellness," he explains. "Because if you don't forgive yourself, you'll become engulfed in guilt and shame, which will prevent you from making any positive changes." That's why self-forgiveness isn't just a one-time thing, according to experts. It's a process in which we begin to replace feelings of guilt and shame with self-compassion, knowledge of our wrongdoing, and a desire to improve, which can swiftly spiral into a destructive cycle. Dr. Van Tongeren argues, it's not letting yourself off the hook. True self-forgiveness, remorse, and repentance all necessitate some level of work in order to effect significant change. Is self-forgiveness the same for all kinds of mistakes? Andrea Marquez, a psychotherapist and LCSW supervisor at Heading Health in Texas, notes that we often think of mistakes in terms of how we've affected another person. In actuality, she argues, self-forgiveness is far larger. And, more often than not, it entails reflecting on self-inflicted behavior. Simple mistakes like going over budget or failing to maintain healthy routines are examples of self-inflicted injury. It can, however, expand to more harmful behaviors such as eating disorders or addiction. Even when we aren't at fault, self-forgiveness can be a beneficial practice. Marquez uses the guilt that people sometimes feel over their emotional response to a terrible incident, such as victim shame after abuse, as an example. Nonetheless, our actions frequently have ramifications for others. While the self-forgiveness process appears to be the same for all degrees of mistakes, Dr. Van Tongeren notes that there will be a lot more emotional and cognitive work to do if it's a bigger offense, or one that affects more people. Why does forgiving ourselves seem so difficult? Based on a survival cost-benefit analysis, researchers released a study in Frontiers in Psychology that explains how our forefathers were motivated to forgive others. They'd assessed the risk of someone causing future harm against the long-term benefits of maintaining the community's stability. We, on the other hand, do not always give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. We have a tendency to be quite severe as we sit in judgment of ourselves, because we know ourselves so well and because we know all the circumstances around the decisions and mistakes that we have made, says Bradley Nelson, D.C., a holistic physician and author of The Emotional Code. It's true that forgiving ourselves is typically the most hardest person to forgive. Dr. Van Tongeren offers a few explanations based on his study for why self-forgiveness is so difficult to achieve. We associate remorse with guilt and shame. People often think to themselves, according to Dr. Van Tongeren, how would anyone know they're sincerely contrite if they're not self-flagellating or self-denigrating? Marquez continues, it's this underlying belief that suffering through self-blame and shame is a method of paying for our misdeeds. We may even assume we don't deserve forgiveness depending on the apparent hurt we've caused. It's almost a martyr attitude, she explains. We are caught in a cycle of guilt and humiliation. Dr. Van Tongeren argues that some people become accustomed to carrying their shame and guilt with them. This could be due to a variety of factors, including deeply ingrained cultural norms, cognitive biases such as perfectionism, and health issues such as addiction. He explains they internalize their shame and guilt, they embody it, and it's difficult for them to let go. He uses the example of someone who is attempting to abstain from drinking and decides to have a drink. They may feel so guilty and ashamed that they rationalize, well, I've already made a mistake, I might as well not try to undo it. He explains, in for a penny, in for a pound. They then feel so guilty about overdrinking that the next day they resort to this same, value-inconsistent behavior to alleviate their guilt and shame. And so you're stuck in this cycle, says Dr. Van Tongeren. What's going on is that you're so engulfed in guilt and shame that you're resorting to unhealthy coping mechanisms. We're not sure if we've grasped the significance of our lesson. I think other individuals have a hard time with self-forgiveness because they want to make sure they're not rushing it, Dr. Van Tongeren explains. This hesitancy stems from a fear that we aren't making the correct or enough changes to earn self-forgiveness. We add gasoline to the shame cycle by continuing to beat ourselves up and indulge in negative self-talk. Traveling on this path can sometimes bring up recollections of past mistakes we haven't entirely let go of, Marquez adds. We could unearth deeper trauma or underlying mental processes that are to blame for the behavior we feel guilty about. All of this can be difficult to confront. Why is it vital to learn how to forgive yourself? Dr. Van Tongeren and his colleagues studied the effects of practicing self-forgiveness in a study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology. We found that self-forgiveness is linked to higher mental health across research, he explains. Self-forgiveness as a technique for mental health. Forgiving ourselves does more than merely get us out of the guilt-shame cycle. It boosts self-confidence and produces a more positive self-image, Marquez explains. We make ourselves less sensitive to other people's criticism by forgiving ourselves. It teaches us to absorb criticism more constructively rather than taking it personally, which feeds our insecurities. Guilt and shame take a physical toll. According to Nelson, a lack of self-forgiveness leads to a higher overall stress level. Our entire body can suffer when our stress hormones go into overdrive. The following are examples of these effects. A weakened immune system, making you more susceptible to illness, elevated blood sugar and blood pressure levels, stomach aches and digestive problems. We don't sleep as well, we don't get along as well with people, and our ability to actually be joyful and experience joy becomes increasingly harder, he says. Is it possible to forgive yourself too quickly? When we completely process guilt or remorse, it can be adaptive, says Sarah Kaufman, LMSW, a psychotherapist at Cobb's Psychotherapy in New York. We may start to unearth why we do what we do, and where we want to go when we act as detectives, attempting to figure out why we feel guilty or why we regret something, she explains. But here's the thing, we have to be conscious of what we're doing and why we're doing it. We can't modify something we don't comprehend. That's why, according to experts, it doesn't matter how quickly you forgive yourself for making a mistake. What matters is that you engage in thoughtful self-reflection. What harm did my acts cause? What are my thoughts about that? What is my preferred method of progress? This self-reflection process does not have to take a certain amount of time to be effective, adds Kaufman. It's about internalizing the feelings and concepts that arise. What are some ways to forgive yourself? While self-forgiveness has no defined time limit, that doesn't imply you should rush through it. Dr. Van Tongeren advises, you need to think hard about your acts, and who they harmed, yourself and other people, and you need to own it. And that's the difficult part. Here's what the experts have to say about how to navigate this process in a positive and successful manner. Begin by being compassionate to yourself. Self-compassion entails being able to look at yourself and your actions objectively, compassionately, and acceptingly. We don't always show ourselves the same compassion that we show others, Dr. Van Tongeren explains. When a friend arrives late for dinner, for example, everyone is irritated. However, after they arrive and apologize, most of us find it rather easy to move on from the discomfort. However, some of us hold ourselves to such a higher standard than others, adds Dr. Van Tongeren. So, even if another person has forgiven us, we continue to punish ourselves for making a mistake. That's why, without self-compassion, healthy guilt may quickly devolve into harmful rumination, the inability to stop thinking about what went wrong. This can sometimes rise to emotions of shame or guilt that last for a long period, Kaufman explains. It can also make finding acceptance and moving forward more difficult. The 4 R's of self-forgiveness should be followed. The 4 R's is a self-forgiveness therapeutic model that has been validated by research published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology. According to the findings, this model assisted people in not only forgiving themselves for a specific offense, but also in experiencing a stronger feeling of well-being in general. It appears as follows. Responsibility. Dr. Van Tongeren emphasizes that self-forgiveness begins with admitting you made a mistake. It's critical to resist the desire to assign blame and instead take responsibility for your error. Taking responsibility, Marquez argues, may even be a great way to let go of guilt. It often reveals that we have done less harm than we thought. Remorse. Nelson defines remorse as feeling guilty for what we've done. Our commitment to not make the same mistake again is powered by this anguish or sorrow, he continues. However, it's critical to recognize your own remorse's boundaries. That includes understanding when your emotional reaction goes beyond your control, such as when you feel guilty or ashamed about an issue you didn't cause. Kaufman adds, you can only control what you can control. Restoration is an attempt to restore what has been lost as a result of your error. For example, if you had a weak moment and stole something, restoration would entail returning the stolen item, according to Nelson. However, there are situations when there is nothing physical that can be done, such as when you snap at a partner or coworker. In this perspective, repair entails accepting responsibility and apologizing. Renewal. One risk of self-forgiveness is to overlook this phase. According to Dr. Van Tongeren, the process isn't very fruitful if we choose to forgive ourselves without making any changes. We may pause and think about the complete process that started with the mistake that we made in this renewal phase, Nelson says. We may reflect on why we made the error in the first place, and what we can do to avoid it in the future. Don't get too worked up about minor details. Another self-forgiveness pitfall? We have a tendency to exaggerate our mistakes at times. Some mistakes are actual blunders, Marquez explains. We don't have to look for meaning, takeaways, or lessons in every mistake we make. But it can be difficult to accept that if there isn't a positive consequence in the shape of a lesson learned, she explains. This propensity is frequent among people who suffer from cognitive distortions like perfectionism, and it could be an indication of generalized anxiety disorder, according to a study published in BMC Psychiatry. That's why, if you're having problems offering yourself compassion or agonizing over every mistake you make, professional help may be necessary. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, can help people work through unpleasant emotions like guilt and navigate the steps to self-forgiveness while also retraining the thought processes that lead to them in the first place. So mates, that's all for today. Let us know what you think about forgiveness in the comments. Rate the video. Thank you.